The region of Sudan has a long history of religious conflict. The Muslim north and the south, which was first pagan and later Christian, have been at odds with one another for hundreds of years. This video will examine the historical causes of this conflict, from its roots in Ottoman-controlled Sudan, through the period of British colonialism, and to the modern nations of Sudan and South Sudan. The first foundational factors of the Sudanese civil conflicts were created during Sudan's period as an Ottoman-controlled colony. In 1820, an Ottoman army led by Muhammad Ali invaded northern Sudan and finished its conquest by the end of the next year, and set up a government known as the Turkiya. Although Islam was present in northern Sudan prior to this invasion, its status was elevated due to being a shared faith with those now in control of the region. Furthermore, Muslims in the north shared the Arabic language with the new ruling elite, and so had greater ability to benefit from the seat of power. The Ottomans brought with them a number of increasingly modern practices to northern Sudan. The practice of private land ownership was introduced, and new laws passed by the Turkiya protected an individual's right to own land. Prior to the Ottoman invasion, the land was owned by all, but individuals could have the right to certain percentages of the yield of different fields. As part of the Ottoman Empire, Sudan would have an increase in trade with the rest of the world. This change to the socio-economic system of Sudan would disenfranchise both the Jalaba, an ethnic group within the north of Sudan, and the people of southern Sudan, as they either lost the rights to their fields or were sold into slavery. The Ottomans did not invade Sudan looking to help its people. Rather, they wished to profit from the land, primarily through ivory and slaves. The Turks greatly expanded the system of slavery in northern Sudan and began the practice of using slaves to perform most agricultural labor. In order to fuel this demand for new slaves, raids began to be conducted in the south of Sudan to capture them. The Turkiya demanded taxes from any landowner in order to further profit from its conquest, and these taxes had to be paid in either gold or slaves. After 60 years as an Ottoman colony, the Sudanese people had grown tired of being exploited by foreign powers. Muhammad Ahmad, also known as the Mahdi, claimed to be given a mission from God to repel outside powers from Sudan, who were collectively referred to as Turks, regardless of their origin. He was ultimately successful in liberating Sudan from Ottoman control.
By 1884, the Sufi Muslim leader Muhammad Ahmad and his Mahdist forces had control of most of northern Sudan, while southern Sudan remained primarily under the control of local tribes with pagan religious beliefs. British forces sent General Charles Gordon, a well-known Christian crusader, into Mahdist-occupied Sudan to evacuate forces who had survived Mahdist attacks. However, Muhammad Ahmad, claiming God-given sovereignty, attacked General Gordon's relief forces, killing him and his men. Muhammad met a sudden unexpected death, suspected to have been typhus, in 1885, and Abdu Ali was designated the principal caliph. This new caliph was met with many problems, as Muhammad's offspring tried to claim power, famine ravaged northern Sudan, and local Christian tribes resisted Muslim conversion. By 1898, the combined forces of Egypt and Britain had taken control of Sudan from the Mahdists and destroyed Mahdist tombs. Sudan was a very attractive point of expansion for both Egypt and Britain. Sudan sits upriver of the Nile from Egypt. Egyptians feared that the Sudanese population would over-irrigate the Nile, taking away one of their most precious resources. For the British, Sudan held some of the world's most valued cotton plantations. An article from the 1924 issue of The Nation cites an expected 500,000 acres of cotton to be exported, compared to America's largest cotton operation, which only held 15,000 acres. While Britain and Egypt had joint control of Sudan, most of the power fell on British-appointed rulers. The British now controlled an enormous country which had been ravished by years of war under modest rule. The north was primarily Muslim, while the south held on to pagan religions, and was the only region accepting of Christian missionaries. In the north, in order to keep the modest followers, which were primarily Sufi Muslims, under their thumb, British forces highly discouraged Sufi tombs and celebrations, and instead promoted Sunni Muslim rule. Under this rule, Sudanese Arab-descended tribes, such as the Wadawit, continued the capture and selling of Sudanese and Ethiopian slaves. Many of the tribes raided were pagan, and Muslim tribes claimed religious merit over them as reasoning behind their enslavement. Sudan encouraged British forces to establish refugee centers for liberated slaves and establish an anti-slavery headquarters. However, the Ethiopian government, while politically against slavery, did nothing to try and stop its expansion within their own lands. During this time, in the early 1900s, refugees fled from Ethiopia to Sudan to avoid slavery, until 1924, when slavery was abolished in Ethiopia and strict punishments were enforced. Over the next 20 years, Britain seemed to have a relatively strong hold on Sudan. As one writer writes from the National Geographic, it is because of the prestige of the British administrators have established that we were able to live alone, without protection and without being in the slightest danger, among two of the most famous of the former fighting tribes. However, following World War II, an increase in Sudanese nationalism and the deterioration of British colonialism demanded that Sudan be recognized as an independent nation in 1953.
As Sudan was being given political independence from the British, issues arose as a constitution was being written. The British chose to integrate the separate northern and southern regions of Sudan. Furthermore, while exclusive control was given to the northern region, the south only achieved semi-autonomous rule, differing to the north on some decisions. There were also problematic divisions over the issues of Sudan being secular or Islamic, as well as being a federal or unitary state. A federal state would be a union of several partially autonomous states, while a unitary government would assign a central government exclusive power over the entirety of the country. North Sudan sought to maintain their total control over Sudan and create an Islamic state. The disunity that resulted from these factors resulted in two civil wars that have caused millions of deaths and ruined even more lives. During the tense time when Britain was transferring power over to Sudan, the issues of a secular state versus Islamic state and federal versus unitary created some political unrest. As tensions rose, southern insurgents mutinied and formed a separatist movement known as the Land Freedom Army. Their major rallying cry was one of independence. The Land Freedom Army wanted to separate from the general government of Sudan. This eventually became a civil war between the Land Freedom Army and the general government. The war was known as the Anyana Rebellion, which lasted from 1955 to 1972. This war eventually ended with the Addis Ababa Agreement in 1972, in which South Sudan was given autonomy on internal issues. They were also given the right to hold a referendum on staying in their current relationship with North Sudan or leaving to join the southern region. The Second Sudanese Civil War started in part because of the northern view on the south. To the north, the south was a potential source of cheap labor and land with abundant natural resources to use for monetary gain. Furthermore, many of the northern Sudanese felt superior to those in South Sudan. It was also the desire of the northern Sudanese government to eventually shift towards an Islamic state. These ideals were held by General Ibrahim Aboud, an Arab and Muslim military man. In 1964, Ibrahim Aboud became Sudan's first official president. While in office, he aimed to install programs that promoted Arabization and Islamization. The following president, Ghaffar Nimeri, officially declared his hopes of converting southern Sudan into a Muslim state. He attempted to achieve this through imposing Sharia law. These factors pushed Sudan into its second civil war. The death toll for this particular conflict was staggering, with between 1 and 2 million civilians dying from starvation or conflict, and even more displaced. In 1989, a peace agreement was made between the North and South, suspending Sharia law. Unfortunately, a military coup in June 1989, led by Omar al-Bashir, overthrew the government and undid the peace agreement. In 2005, peace was sought out yet again. A permanent ceasefire was enforced and the South was granted more autonomy. However, throughout the following years, there have been disputes over borders, and in 2011, the people of South Sudan held a referendum to separate fully from North Sudan. The border fighting persisted into the current year. However, in May 2017, the current president of Sudan, President Kiir, declared a unilateral ceasefire. The conflict is now largely fought along ethnic lines, and the army itself is split into factions. We believe that keeping the South autonomous from the North is the first step in quelling this problem. This gives the South the freedom to maintain its secularity, which we believe will be a major stabilizing factor in the peace efforts between ethnic groups, as these ethnic groups come from different pagan backgrounds. In addition, establishing and maintaining a UN peacekeeping force as an unbiased party would be essential. The UN force could encourage peace negotiations as well as contain any violence. Additionally, other nations could apply diplomatic pressure to encourage South Sudan to begin peace talks amongst ethnic groups. Diplomatic pressure could come in the form of cutting diplomatic ties and imposing sanctions. With these efforts, hopefully these two countries plagued by war and conflict can finally achieve peace.